Refused to continue a war that was no longer in the service of the vital national interest of our people. I refuse to open another decade of warfare in Afghanistan.
Welcome back to America Decides. It has now been 2 years since the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. The Biden administration defends the move, while Republicans say the withdrawal was chaotic and a failure. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul held a roundtable this afternoon with families of the 13 U.S. service members who lost their lives during a terrorist attack at Kabul's airport during the withdrawal. The congressman joins us now. He serves as the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Chairman McCaul, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Nancy.
So 2 years later, what lessons have we learned from the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Well, we're raising more questions than answers, quite frankly. I started a very aggressive investigation once I became chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. We heard powerful testimony from the parents of these children who were killed in the massive suicide bomb attack that killed 13 service members, wounded 45 others, and then killed 170 Afghans. This is a massive explosion. And every time, the more we investigate, the more questions are raised. For instance, the sniper who testified, Tyler Vargas Andrews, testified that he had the suicide bomber in his sights and the sniper team as well. And they sent pictures to get permission to engage the suicide bomber. The commanding officer, who we scheduled to interview early in September, said he didn't have that authority. So there was no permission to engage. And then 2 hours later, the bomber went off. In addition, there was intelligence that ISIS-K was in a hotel room in Kabul plotting the suicide bombing attack. And again, the military requested an airstrike be conducted. That request was denied also at the higher level. So twice we had an opportunity to prevent this. And that's what's so hard on these families, is the fact that it could have been stopped. It didn't have to happen. And they deserve the answers. The American people are listening to them. Congress is listening to them. But the administration needs to listen to them and give them the answers they deserve.
The military might argue that it's easy to go back in hindsight and take a look at the various pieces of evidence and information that were there at the time. It was almost fog of war as they were working to withdraw before the deadline, and they knew that the Taliban was making its way into the city. Realistically, what kinds of lessons do you think the military and the administration should draw from this experience?
And I think that's a great question, because eventually what they want to know, the family members, they want us to come up with solutions so that this never, ever happens again. Now, the original decision to withdraw, the top generals and intelligence community did not agree with that decision. Having said that, if you're going to do this, do it right. And it was rushed under this false artificial timeline. And it led to this chaos that we saw at the airport. We saw the people hanging from the airplane, falling from the sky, and then the suicide bomber attack. What we found is that the State Department is supposed to lead this evacuation, and yet they don't even request that evacuation plan from the DOD until 2 days after the fall of Kabul. They waited too late, and it was so chaotic and dysfunctional that nobody knew who was in charge, whether it be DOD or state, and that led to all the confusion on the ground that ultimately led to this suicide bomber attack at Abbey Gate.
Earlier this month, you actually sent a letter to the State Department saying that they had failed to comply with your committee's subpoena. You were seeking after-action review files on the withdrawal. Have you since gotten those files or any transcribed interviews?
I have. I had a very serious talk with Secretary Blinken. I think we had a meeting of the minds that we can play this game of subpoena and try to hold them in contempt, or they can just be honest with Congress and the American people and start producing the documents that we've requested. So they have started to produce these documents, many of them in the classified space, which I would argue they don't have to be classified. And the family members deserve this. But we also got movement from, I got a call from General Milley about, the Gold Star families. I think they're starting to finally pay attention to this because the families are speaking out. And, I said, why are the Marines not allowing us access to the commanding officer who denied permission to take out this threat of the suicide bomber? Finally, after 6 months, we were finally going to get access to him. But there's so many more questions we need answers to. And we're going to take this all the way up to the highest part, the highest chain of command.
I want to make sure to ask you about Ukraine before you go. Last week, Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy said he would accept Russia taking control of some Ukrainian territory, and he'd also end U.S. sanctions on Russia if that's what it takes to end the war in Ukraine. What do you think of this approach?
Well, I think that would be a surrender to Russian aggression, just like we surrendered to the Taliban. And this is not just about Russia and Putin. It's about Chairman Xi and China and their unholy alliance. And when I went to Asia, what happens in Ukraine will impact what happens in Taiwan. I think that is a very risky foreign policy. What I did notice at that debate was that 6 of the 8 candidates were very strongly supportive of our efforts to contain Russian aggression. And then the last candidate was somewhere on the fence that if Europe stood up to the plate more, that he would be supportive. So we have a supplemental before us. There was no collaboration with Congress. I've talked to the Speaker about this, and we're going to take a look at it, but we're not going to rubber stamp or write a blank check. But they need the input of Congress, who has the power of the purse authority. So I anticipate we're going to be looking at this closely. I do anticipate you will see something that will pass before the end of the fiscal year as Ukraine is in this counteroffensive movement. I just wish the administration had given them the weapons they needed a year and a half, 2 years ago, because we probably would be in a very different situation today.
It's interesting to hear that you do think that this supplemental will pass eventually. Congressman McCaul, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for having me.